Welcome to the Eco Scientist Podcast. My name is Amalya and I am your host. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things science, conservation, and climate. I'm going to dive deep into the ethics, the emotions, and the facts to bring you all the information you need to survive in the world of STEM. So sit down, chill out, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Eco Scientist Podcast. Today we're going to be chatting about climate anxiety and what you can do to alleviate these feelings a little bit. But before we jump into that, I've just got a bit of housekeeping. If you haven't listened to episode 1 of the podcast, I definitely recommend listening to that before you listen to this one. It's just got a bit of background information that will help you understand where I'm coming from and the different things I might reference throughout this episode. If you're jumping into this episode right off the back of episode 1, I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to post them on the Eco Scientist Instagram page, which is @EcoScientist, and that's just all one word. But speaking of episode 1, did you guys hear the birds in the background? I could hear them when I was recording, but I didn't realize that you could hear them until after I'd already published the episode. I've got some marshland behind my place and there's a lot of finches out there, so if you hear them again in this episode, or the crow that's currently screaming at the sky outside my window, I would just like to say that while I recognise their points, the views expressed by the birds do not necessarily represent my views or the Eco Scientist Podcast. So with that, let's just jump into today's topic, which is climate anxiety. Now, if you're not really familiar with what I'm referencing to when I say climate anxiety, it might be a lot more complicated than your first impressions. Basically, climate anxiety is this feeling of anxiousness and fear that a lot of people are beginning to suffer from as a result of the current environmental climate situation that we as a human race have caused. It's something that's a lot more debilitating than you might think and can lead to serious cases of depression and in some cases has even resulted in suicide. Climate anxiety is really no joke. It's brought on by a lot of different things for different people, and it manifests itself in different forms. A lot of people suffer from feelings of helplessness, anger, fear, confusion, depression, and emotional detachment. It makes people ask themselves some very serious questions, and it's caused a lot of young people in particular to make completely different life choices than what they would have done if climate change wasn't a reality. I think that it's something that only really happens for those of us that acknowledge climate change and the effects it's already having on our planet and the things that are predicted to happen in the future. And this is one of those things where ignorance really is bliss. I often think about that concept. You know those people who are hardcore climate change deniers and, the ones that have no idea, they remain ignorant to a lot of the information. And for them, it must be so much easier. They can just jump online and see an article about how we only have 12 years to save the world, basically, and they just laugh at it. But when I see those articles, it sends me into this spiral of anxiety and questions and anger, and it's so much, and it can flip your day around, and sometimes it really hurts. And I think it would just be so much easier if I could laugh at those stupid scientists and think that it's all a load of garbage. It would be so much easier to live my day-to-day life if I was ignorant to climate change. But I'm not ignorant to climate change, and if everybody was, we would have even less hope for a stable future than we already do. But like I said before, climate anxiety often causes people to make different decisions throughout their life to try and help the cause. Usually, these include things like dietary changes or using a keep cup to drink their coffee from or switching to solar energy if they can. But sometimes the decisions that people make and the things in our lives that we change are a lot larger than just buying a different cup to drink our coffee from. I know for myself personally that I am quite a maternal person and I've always wanted children of my own. However, I have this fear that surrounds the future of our planet and our global economies and the probability of an outbreak of global war and food security issues that we have. And, from an ethical standpoint, the human population is already too large. There are millions of children without parents and children without homes, and they deserve to be adopted. And I fear that having my own children would only ever exacerbate the problems that we already have. And the last thing I want to do is to bring a child into this world with such an uncertain future. But birth rates in the Western world are actually decreasing. And if everyone was to stop having children, that wouldn't be good either. And no one should be made to feel guilty for having kids. But I know a lot of other young men and women who feel the same. People who always dreamed of having their own little family, but now are too scared to do so. And then you have people who already do have children and they're so fearful of what the future holds for them. You know, how do you look a 2-year-old little girl in the eyes and tell her that the planet she lives on is on a path that means she might not have food security or clean air to breathe by the time she's 45? How do you tell her that we didn't do enough? And what do you do when she asks you why you didn't do enough? These are the things that I'm terrified of for my younger siblings. I come from this large family and there's quite an age gap between myself and my brothers and sisters, and I often find myself so scared when I look at them and try and imagine what their future might be like. I couldn't imagine how hard it would be to look at my own children and feel the same way, and that makes me not want to have any, just that fear, you know? And if this is something that you've experienced, I just want you to know that you're not alone and it's okay to feel this way. I'm going to do a whole episode on children and having them, adopting them and raising them in this world of uncertain futures. And I'll include a bit of a Q&A on the Instagram page a bit closer to the date, and we'll get some people in to ask about their experiences as well. So stay tuned for that episode. But continuing with the climate anxiety chat, for those of us that are studying or working in STEM, particularly in climate science or conservation, there's this whole pile of questions that we constantly ask ourselves that stem from this climate anxiety. You know, questions like, am I doing enough? Am I talking to the right people or researching the right topic? Did I make a mistake? Am I smart enough, significant enough, credible enough? Will anything I ever say or do have an impact? Will the world really change? Or are we just going to keep going as we are, business as usual, and destroy the planet? Becoming part of this field is such a huge sacrifice that is often not acknowledged. And for myself, as well as many other people in climate or conservation sciences and aspects of STEM like those, we all have the brains or the power to be doctors and engineers and lawyers, and we could all be public servants with jobs that society deems noble, jobs that impress people, and we would all be a hell of a lot more financially stable than most people in my field are if we were working in other areas. And sometimes that makes you wonder if you made the right choice. For me, I always wanted to be a pediatrician. I wanted to be that doctor that spent their time saving children's lives. And then one day I just kind of realized that I don't know if I could be that person to look someone in the eye and tell them, I'm sorry, your child's going to die and there's nothing I can do about it. And then I found conservation and marine science and ornithology, and I fell in love, and I decided that I didn't have to tell people that their kids were going to die, because I guess that's all I saw in that field. But I mean, if I did take that path, I could be just about to finish medical school. I would be working in a hospital, maybe saving children's lives. You know, people might think that I was impressive or noble in that job. I could be owning a home a lot sooner, and I would have definite financial security, which would be nice. I'd be in a field where I could remain more or less oblivious to climate change, and I'm sure I would be gutted telling people that I couldn't save their kids. But when you're constantly slammed with data on the way the world is falling apart and you feel like you can't do anything about it, you still feel like you're failing children. So when you're watching your peers begging politicians to listen, begging someone to do something, that doesn't make you happy, and sometimes it's really difficult to justify being in this line of work. You know, it's hard to see the data every day. It's hard to be the first person to know when a species might be going extinct. It's hard to write about it. It's hard to talk about it. And when the most important people in the world don't even listen, it makes things a lot harder. The biggest problem that I face, and a problem I think you might face too, is how debilitating this can be. Recently, I was writing about the decline of a bird population on Fraser Island, and when I started writing about the fact that their population is too small to recover, it took me twice as long to write half as many words because it really hurt, and I just didn't feel like there was a point anymore. What can I do about this, and how is it gonna do anything if I do try, and who's even gonna care enough to read about it? In addition to this, it just puts you in a bad mood, which affects the people around you. You feel like there's no point in anything. You might as well just quit. And for some people, these thoughts are just the top of a huge downward spiral that really isn't a good place to be. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some coping mechanisms and things that you can do to re-spark that fire in your soul, because the fear and anxiety around our climate situation is completely necessary. We do need to do something, and we need to do something fast, but we all know that. And if you let these feelings cripple you, and if that spark in your soul goes away, we might never find solutions. So I've got 5 tips and strategies that I use on a regular basis to help pull me out of this downward spiral, and things that really do spark that fire for me again. And I think, and I really hope, that these tips work for you too. So the first one, and probably for me this was the most impactful, is to get the hell off social media. We live in this age where everything is centered around technology, and I find it's very easy to detach from reality when you spend so much time on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, which is a huge distraction for me. But if you really think about it, you might not be noticing all the little things in life anymore. So if you ask yourself, when was the last time you ate a meal by yourself and you really tasted the food? Like, really tasted it. Instead of scrolling through Facebook when you ate your breakfast, instead, what if you noticed all of the little flavors in your food or the bitterness in your coffee? What if you looked around at your surroundings on a walk, or touched the leaves and railings and just things that aren't your phone? It's really easy to hate the world we live in when you see it through a screen. But when you step back and you focus on reality and you start to notice the little things and the beautiful things about people and places and finer details, it's really easy to start loving the world again. And I didn't realize how addicted I was to my phone until I saw this YouTube video by a woman called Sorel Amour. She did a 30-day social media detox, and in this video, she spoke about it and all of these amazing things that happened to her just because she was more present. And at the time when I watched this video, I was experiencing a lot of brain fog and anxiety, and a lot of things that she made me realize might just be symptoms of being on social media for a bit too long. Like, I was on my phone every spare minute, constantly checking notifications and comparing myself to other people, and it was really toxic. So I decided to take some time off. I ended up taking about 4 weeks off social media, and I can honestly say that it was one of the best things I've done for myself and my mental health in years. And one of the biggest things that my social media detox did for me was it kind of reinstilled that drive and passion I had and made me see why things were worth it again. And I felt so much more hopeful, and my climate anxiety was drastically reduced. I could talk for hours about the things that happened to my brain and the ways I improved and how much good this detox did for me, but I feel like we don't really have time for that. So if you want to know more, there's a post about it on my Instagram. It's a photo of a sunset, so it should be pretty easy to find, but I'll also link Sorel's video in the show notes below because it's a really, really good one. So definitely check that video out and think about taking a detox from social media yourself. The second thing that helped me a lot is traveling. Seeing new parts of the world and experiencing different cultures and seeing habitats and animals and parts of the environments that I thought were gone really gave me hope that things might be okay. It also teaches you so much, and a lot of the time you can come home with these ideas that might just change things. Having the experiences that I had overseas, especially with research projects throughout my undergrad, has really taken my perspective on the world to a whole new level. And if you don't have the understanding of the way the world is so different in different places, you can't really solve the different problems that different places have. So I think travel is actually a really essential part of being a good scientist, especially if you're in any sort of biological or ecological field. And for me personally, traveling makes me feel so alive. One example I have is when I was in rural Fiji, I spent so much of my free time jumping out of trees and leaping from vines to this rope swing over a river with the village children. And it was so wild and so wholesome, and I really got to know them all on an individual level. And then when I cooked with the women in my house, I learnt so much about their perspectives on the world, and they really showed me a side and a story of climate change that I hadn't seen before. And I've had experiences like these in almost every place I've been to, and these experiences have given me so much hope and perspectives that have changed who I am as a person, as well as improved who I am as a scientist. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, traveling is really expensive. I know that. And not everyone can just drop their life and gallivant around the Galapagos. But traveling is a hell of a lot more accessible than what people might have led you to believe, and I'm going to do a whole episode on traveling. But for now, there is a blog post on the Eco-Scientist blog detailing how I traveled so much throughout my undergrad, which I did mostly for free. So if that's something that interests you, the link will be in my Instagram bio and in the show notes below, so check that one out there. Kind of straight off the travel tip, the third tip I have is to get out into nature. A lot of the things that make me sad about our current climate situation involve images of bleached reefs and barren lands where forests once were that, build up in my brain, as well as species extinction, and this idea that I seem to get that the world is just dirt and smoke and cement buildings now, which is not true. And to help myself get over this, I find it really helpful to get into nature. Going hiking and surfing and snorkeling are some of my favorite little escapes, but you could do anything. You could kayak or rock climb or walk on the beach or even just go stand in the sun at a park for a little while. And just make sure that when you do these things, you're present. And if you can do these things, try and go to places like reefs or forests and notice the abundance and diversity of life that still does exist. Listen to the sounds of, birds and trees and water and really take it all in. Because when I do these things, it gives me a lot more hope and it reinstills that sense of purpose again. The fourth thing you can do, and this is one thing that's really been helpful for me, is to empower yourself. So when you're done with your social media break, if you take one, I want you to jump on Instagram, clear out those Instagram models, clear out those companies, unfollow those brands that just want to sell you more crap that you don't need, and follow empowering people instead. One of my favorites is Gina Martin. Her handle is at Gina Martin UK. She's a feminist from the UK who just released a book, or is about to release the book, I believe, called Be the Change. And as far as I'm aware, she discusses her upskirting laws in the UK, and she gives a heap of tips on how you can make changes to laws or social norms in areas that you might be passionate about. Now, this woman is pretty bloody cool. She's not a politician, but she changed a law. Epic. Mind blown. I can't wait to read her book. It's definitely a good one, so check her out. I also follow some sustainable brands and ocean-saving Instagram pages and charities and people who are recycling plastic and doing cool things to help reduce the amount of waste that we produce as humans and stuff like that. So following those people instead of following Instagram models just gives me a lot of sense of hope, and I hope it gives you a sense of hope as well. So I definitely recommend that. You can also empower yourself by watching TED Talks, listening to podcasts, or empowering music or learning new skills. The idea of this is just to help you realize that you can do something. Yes, you're one person, but that doesn't mean that you can't completely change the world. I mean, think about the most influential people in history on both the good and the bad sides. Take Adolf Hitler, for example. He was just one guy, just one, but he changed a whole lot of things, started a huge war just because people followed him, but he was still one guy. Also, Martin Luther King Jr., just one person too, and holy heck did he start some changes. Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, both just two dudes. Donald Trump, also just one person. My favorite example, Greta Thunberg, just one tiny little person, but holy moly, that girl has some passion. And you are also one person, but that doesn't mean that you're any less capable of inciting change because you're one person, because all of these people are just individuals as well, and you are no different to them. But you can't do those things if you don't believe it. So you have to empower yourself. You have to find people who believe in themselves, and you have to surround people who believe in you. You have to consume media that's good for you, and you have to stop comparing yourself to Instagram models or people who are further along in their timeline than you are. And what I mean by that is you would never compare your basket of ingredients to somebody else's finished cake. So why are you comparing yourself to others now? Basically, empower yourself. You and everyone else in this world will be so much better for it. Finally, tip number 5 that I have for you is to seek help, my dudes. Don't bottle all of this stuff up. Seriously, talk to other people in similar situations. Talk to your friends and family, and if you need to seek the help of a therapist, seek the help of a therapist. It's common for climate anxiety to cause severe issues with our mental health as humans, and if you have pre-existing trauma or pre-existing mental health issues, climate anxiety will only make things harder for you to deal with, so seek help if you need it. There really is no shame in it at all, and just think that if you seek help and you overcome these things, maybe, just maybe, you might be the one who changes the world. You might see something that no one else has seen before, and maybe if you don't get help, you won't see it. So those are just 5 tips that I have to help alleviate climate anxiety. I hope you guys find those tips helpful. But if you have any more tips of your own, feel free to share them on the Eco Scientist Instagram page, because you really might help some people out, and that's what this podcast is for. If you want all of the latest updates or would like to be involved in the Q&A sections, which I'll be doing every now and then, be sure to head to the Instagram page, which is @EcoScientist, or head to the blog, both of which will be linked in the show notes below. At this stage, it looks like I'll be uploading a new podcast every week, most likely on a Tuesday, so make sure you stay tuned for the next one. So with that, I'm going to end the episode here, and I'll talk to you guys next week. That was episode 2 of the Eco Scientist podcast. I'm Amalya Valley, wishing you a great day or a great night wherever you are.